Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our View from the Top, a Tower CEO Roundtable, sponsored by Network Building and Consulting, NB&C for short. Same dedicated and experienced wireless site development company, now with a brand new look. This brief video will explain more. Roll it.
Well, that was fantastic hearing from Relay Casino. We appreciate his commitment to public service and his willingness to be here with us today. Fantastic statement from him. And now it's time for our annual View from the Top panel. All of our top leaders in the industry are here, and of course they're all members of the board of PCIA, great supporters, and we appreciate all their guidance and leadership. We thank our sponsor, NB&C, for making this possible. So joining me on stage here is Jeff Stoops, the President and CEO of SBA Communications, Ben Moreland, who's our Chairman, President and CEO of Crown Castle, Mark Ganzi, Mark?
Unemployed.
and his acquirer, Stephen Marshall, Executive Vice President, President of U.S. Tower Division of American Tower, and also the Treasurer of PCIA. Thank you so much all for being here and for your support of PCIA. I guess the question on a lot of people's minds, Steve, is what do you think of your latest purchase?
Oh, great. Thank you, Jonathan. Absolutely delighted, as you might expect. Congratulations to Mark and the team having built a really fantastic franchise with GTP. We are very pleased to be able to consolidate that with the American Tower assets here in the US. We've picked up something like 6,500 towers, which 500 are in sort of Costa Rica, about 6,000 in the US. Another sort of 15,000 rooftops, some access to some DAS properties, some great utility rights and railway rights. So they've got 35,000 miles of railway access rights that can be developed all the time, which Marcus and the team have negotiated in advance of a great opportunity ahead of us. So really great assets. When you combine those with American Tower's assets, we have over 50,000 communication site locations through the towers, the rooftops, and the DAS assets. So we're able to offer superb one-stop shop solutions now to carriers, hopefully reduce your administration costs in terms of accessing those sites, drive the network rollout and development. So very, very pleased indeed. Thank you, Jonathan, and congratulations for building a great team. We're welcoming the many members of the team that are down here in Bolton across the nation to the American Town family now, and hopefully they'll continue to build on the foundation that has been very well prepared. So thank you very much.
Truly an amazing company that Mark, you built, and I guess everybody wants to know, what will you do next?
What is there to do? Well, first of all, it's been a great 10 years. It was a lot of fun building the business, and we have a lot of people to be thankful. You don't get there by doing it yourself. I had a great team of professionals that were very dedicated to the cause. We had a lot of great partners, and those partners are in this room. It's the banking community, it's developers, it's brokers, it's other middle market tower companies that helped us get to where we got to. I think that the future is we've got a portfolio of towers in Mexico we've got to get back to work on. So we'll be busy extricating those towers out of our existing platform and building an independent platform to run those towers. And the idea is to continue to build and buy assets in Mexico with our existing investors there. So we've had our hands full there. That's a market that's growing and a market that has a lot of promise. So we'll be pretty busy on that. And then the beyond plan is to continue to be active in investing in telecommunications infrastructure. I think that my belief is that we are more connected to other parts of the ecosystem just beyond towers. So when we think about the universe of where telecom infrastructure is today, it goes from data centers to backhaul, to fiber, to cloud. All of these parts, Jonathan, are connected. And as you hear carrier plans moving towards voice over LTE, the data component and the ability to move data traffic becomes ever more important in the tower universe. So the going forward investment thesis is to be active in telecommunications infrastructure investing. And I think we'll look at other opportunities outside the tower world, but staying pretty close to home at the end of the day.
Well, good. We want to have you with us for as long as we possibly can. I think it is an exciting time in this industry. We're seeing a lot of energy out on the floor. We're seeing a lot of participation. A lot more people coming this year to the show. I think a lot of what's driving this is 4G, of course. I see it's driven a lot of action lately. The big question is, can you sustain these growth rates? We have seen these coverage maps. As a matter of fact, Mosaic is one of our new members that makes those coverage maps, and you see them getting filled out, and people are kind of wondering, where are we in the 4G build-out, and what's next in terms of as they finish their network, and Sprint and T-Mobile are gearing up to work it through. What do you see where we're at in the 4G build-out now?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jonathan. Good morning, everybody. We continue in the industry to be extremely busy. LTE, regardless of what I think the coverage maps say, still, I believe, in the early innings. We're still getting to full coverage. We're not there yet, and we're just beginning to crack the capacity stage and the ultimate full build-out and tweaking of the networks. So I'm very optimistic that the strong trends that we're currently involved with are going to continue for some period of time. I mean, it really is a good time to be in this industry because unlike prior technological upgrades where some of them are software oriented, in every single case, LTE is an equipment-specific, equipment-intensive upgrade for our customers. And they're keeping us pretty busy, and I think they will for some period of time.
As we talked about it in a small developer forum earlier this week, we're seeing a return to co-locations this year, really out of the leaders in the industry as they've gotten further along into their LTE builds. Verizon and AT&T starting now with the infill network densification. We would certainly expect that from Sprint and T-Mobile as they complete their LTE builds over time. But I want to go back to something, Jonathan. First of all, I want to congratulate you on your first year here and the tremendous momentum we have in PCIA right now, as reflected in some of the early slides that are scrolling through between meetings. And I want to share a little bit of a fun story. Last year at this show, we were very pleased to welcome FCC Chairman Julius Janikowski. And as we were walking off stage, he said, something I've really taken to heart, and I think it's important for all of us in the room. He said, I want to tell you, you're not in the tower business. He said, you're in the broadband wireless business. And I need you, he said, I really want you to think about that. And the wind that you have at your back and the help that we're able to provide in Washington is because you're basically, enabling broadband wireless networks to be built. And I really took that to heart and I thought, and he literally said, nobody wants to hear about the tower business. We want to hear about the broadband wireless business. So something to think about, and certainly is consistent with the presentation we heard yesterday morning from the three gentlemen that spoke. I think this is clearly a fantastic time in the industry. We have a lot going on. I think all the companies would reflect that as we are really building out the broadband wireless capabilities and all the capacity that drives towards utilization on tablets and smartphones and all the different connected cars and things we heard about this morning that are yet to come. So I would share Jeff's view that we're still in the early innings. I've made, 14 of these meetings, 14 years in a row, most of us have. And it's fun to be here and still having that enthusiasm and seeing the growth in the sector.
Well, you mentioned, thank you for those kind words, and it's right. I mean, we are in a great business because wireless broadband is exploding. The demand for data is just going crazy. So you look, we're talking about the coverage maps, and you see moving from sort of the coverage to a capacity time now. Are you sort of seeing that? How are you seeing that on the ground in terms of moving from amendments to co-locations as people are trying to deepen the network and densify and cell split? Are you seeing a sort of shift away from towards new co-locations?
We are. I think we've been very transparent about these stats on our quarterly calls, and the trend continues where of the incremental revenue that we're adding, we probably peaked in the fourth quarter of 2012 with amendments being the highest percentage of contribution that we had ever seen. And now it's starting to constantly, gradually, and steadily move more towards the true new co-location side. And I think that's logical. I mean, when you think about how carriers deploy their networks, it was all about speed and efficiency, which was the amendment process. That's how they got there quickest and cheapest. And then what has followed in past cycles, and I don't see this one's any different, is the infill stage where they test the holes and the demand, and that's really satisfied by brand new tenancies. And we're definitely starting to see that, and I think we'll continue to see that as we move forward. And I think that's going to last for quite some period of time.
Yeah, we're all privileged, I think, to be in a very exciting industry. We've seen unprecedented activity, I think, over the last couple of years, and actually we don't see that stopping anytime soon. Great year this year, expect to have another great year next year. And this is all driven by this underlying demand of additional growth in data and the need to provide the infrastructure to support that, and it's going to continue. So very, very exciting times. We're seeing amendment activity, a lot of amendment activity the last couple of years, less colo activity. It's a bit of a swing back, but even still a lot of amendment activity and probably higher average amendment rates because of these amendments putting on a lot more equipment onto existing RAS centers. So really quite exciting.
Yeah, I would add that the new lease, and I would hazard to guess that you're all saying the same thing, the new lease, brand new co-location tenancy applications are for the largest equipment loads that we've seen.
Well, it's really moved very quickly. I remember I ran into Randall Stevenson early on in my career. He said this 4G rollout is moving the fastest of any technology they've ever seen. I suppose that goes way back to the telegraph. It's coming from. This is quite an impressive feat, and you wonder how that was possible. I mean, under previous Chairman Mark Gansey, we got this legislation from Congress, Section 64.9 on co-location by right. We've had a lot of progress that I talked about yesterday on the fronts of the shot clock, looking at state legislation. The regulatory environment seems to be really improved. As you said the other day, Ben, that Washington actually seems to be trying to help us. Have you sensed that some of these regulatory efforts we've worked so hard on the PCIA have really made a difference on the ground? around in terms of the speed by which carriers are able to get 4G deployed?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly, it's provided a federal law backdrop for local zoning and municipalities to get behind, and in some cases just adopt as a matter of course. It's not universal, as we all know in the room, but it's certainly a momentum that is helping with co-location and additional amendments on sites, and it's certainly very welcome speed to provide to carriers in the marketplace.
Yeah, this is Jonathan and the PCIA team. This is an exceptional development, right, in the history of the industry, and all credit goes to PCIA, to Mike Fitch and Jonathan, more recently, and the team. You have an absolutely exceptional organisation here, and this is your organisation, and they're doing yeoman's work for everybody in this industry. So, I mean, put your hands together for the PCIA team.
Yeah, I think you've succeeded, PCIA, we have succeeded in removing regulatory for the most part as the single, longest delay point. I think issues today are much more around equipment availability and human resources availability. I mean, those are the things that I think are more of the gating issues in terms of how quickly can people go than the regulatory issues.
I was just going to say that two things that were interesting from my perspective, Jonathan, that really symbolized the crystallization of our hard work. Ben mentioned we were in this independent developer forum on Monday, and we were having a roundtable discussion with some developers. One of the developers actually said, it's no longer NIMBY in some of the boards I go to. It's YIMBY, yes in my backyard. And I was like, wait a second, that's never really happened. And he said, no, you'd be surprised about people will actually show up now in zoning board meetings and say, I need this tower because I work at home and I have to be connected. And the momentum shift is one of, it used to be towers were a play on society, but now they're an integral part of the way we lead our lives. And it's not just the way we communicate in a business sense, but it's part of the fabric of how we conduct our families, how we communicate, how we entertain ourselves. And I think that's a big mind shift at a local level. And that was really because of the work that we've done in showing up to zoning board meetings and educating people and getting them to understand the public benefits of wireless infrastructure. And that's a battle that's taken years and years to fight. The second thing that was interesting is I was talking with one of our carriers just before Christmas last year, and they were just starting their 4G deployment, their overlays. And they were having a conference call updating how many sites they completed in California, in Southern California. And they mentioned within the first 90 days of their build-up, they achieved 60% of their objectives. Now, those of you that have built sites in California know that even to do amendments, you have to go de novo for permits, which means you got to go all the way back to the beginning to figure out how you install or add 2 or 3 antennas. And the fact that one of our carrier partners within 90 days had gotten 60% of their coverage objectives was, to me, meant absolutely everything of why we are here and why this trade association exists. Yes, it exists for us to get together and communicate and meet, but really it's for the benefit of our carrier partners. And if we can accelerate their build out and we can reduce costs, then we've really provided value add to our core constituents, which is our customers. And to me, that's why we worked hard on the Hill for years and years and years to get that legislation passed.
Yeah, it's nice that when there are sales in Washington, we often they run on the shoals of local governments or state governments that don't fully get it. Some do, some don't. This year we got 6 states to enact legislation, which is just remarkable. I think you're right that there's been a mind shift. People have these devices, they use them themselves, and they get it, why there needs to be infrastructure to make it possible. We're not about towers, we're about education, about healthcare, about public safety, but we still have ways to go to educate everybody to really have that sink in. What do you see some of the obstacles left? What do we ought to be focusing on now? You think we need the local, state, or federal issues we can help on federal lands?
Well, we could get the government up again so we can get some new towers built. So that's the most pressing issue. I tend to think on the federal side we're in pretty good shape. I think there's always going to be state and local flashpoints where we're going to need to devote our resources to try and expedite and speed up the ability to get infrastructure done. And we all know that there's a long list where we can still spend a lot of good time and effort.
Any other thoughts? What should we be focused on next?
I think we've covered it.
Well, there's a lot of talk about business opportunities ahead. We were really thrilled to have Bill D'Agostino here talking about FirstNet. What do you think about FirstNet? Is that going to make a material difference in the business? And when do you kind of anticipate that's going to start driving the business and real revenue?
Well, it's great to see Bill here this morning and presenting to all of us here, his inner thoughts. I mean, obviously it's a challenging project. It's going to be a multi-year project, and it takes some setting up as well, of course, with the commercial realities of it. So I guess I don't see any activity from an infrastructure side until 2015 at the earliest, and we could even see delays in that. But this is critical. This is absolutely critical public infrastructure for the US. I mean, this has to work. It has to go forward. It's for an economy, for a country like the US, not to have a dedicated, homogeneous system of this nature, it's just an anathema. So it really has to be pushed ahead, and we should all support that in our individual efforts. And the reality is, over time, we'll all be beneficiaries of that system, both from our organisational perspective, but also from our involvement in the community, our access to services and to lifestyles.
I think we're very fortunate to have Bill make the commitment to take on the job. As you can hear from his comments this morning, he's got monumental challenges ahead, and I was very pleased, as he's from the industry, that his prioritization will be co-location on existing sites throughout the industry. And I probably speak for my colleagues, we certainly stand ready to provide our network and deploy sites to make that available, which is the most cost-effective and timely way to roll out a network. He's got other challenges that he needs to sort out between how the spectrum gets used and monetized, and then all the different state issues that he described this morning. But as it relates to the infrastructure side, I think he certainly is well aware of what we bring to the table, and we certainly stand ready to help him when that's required.
I would echo that. Bill's certainly the right man for the job. I believe they have the ability to access about $2 billion prior to the TV broadcast re-auctions. And I think most of that will be spent on, I'm guessing most of it will be spent on kind of the heart of their operations. I think for most of us in this room, the lion's share of the business and the deployments will only occur after the TV spectrum re-auctions have occurred and the funding comes about from that. And of course, that has its own set of timing and logistical challenges.
Mark, you have any thoughts?
No, I think that the challenges that I see are really challenges, Jonathan, similar to what we saw when we were for co-location by right. There's some challenges embedded in the Beltway that Bill's going to have to get through. And this turf war between the local municipalities wanting their own systems, and states wanting their own systems, and counties wanting their own systems. That's a really significant set of challenges. The easy part's going to actually be putting the antennas on the air and getting the network going. So this is one of those issues where we as an industry need to rally behind it because it's really for public benefit, similar to what co-location by use is. And I know you're going to be very active in trying to push that agenda forward. But this is an important moment, and the real turf war is going to happen inside the Beltway initially. And I think if FirstNet can navigate that and get the states and the counties behind them, and I agree with everyone else on the stage. It's the 2015-16 revenue generation opportunity. And I think Bill mentioned today that 35% of the sites will be in the urban core, which means 65% of the rest of the country needs to be covered. So that's a lot of geography to cover. This is a coverage-based network. I mean, you got to obviously cover the big cities, but then as you move outside the cities, the real opportunity for this room is to provide infrastructure outside of the big cities, where there's going to be co-locations, and there's going to be new tower builds, and that should provide opportunity for us as a sector. So it's pretty exciting.
It really is exciting. It's a business opportunity as Americans. We are so committed to helping this to succeed, and we'll do whatever we can as an industry to back up FirstNet and make this work as quickly as we can. I think given the infrastructure that you all have, it's a great opportunity to speed that deployment. A lot of existing assets that can be ready and able to go. So we're thinking about, you know, the business opportunities. What's next? Is that another carrier first? And is there another one on the horizon? Last year we had Charlie Ergen on the stage here at PCIA. He said, "I wouldn't come to this show unless I meant to build infrastructure." What do you think? Do you think Dish is gonna be the next tenant? Do you think there's anybody else on the horizon that is gonna help drive the business forward?
Well, one thing is true. Every time we think we know the players in the industry, they change, and that's a constant. And so Dish is very public about their need and desire to have a wireless product. They've been obviously very aggressive in acquiring spectrum, and have made no bones about their interest in either acquiring or partnering with a wireless carrier to get out and build a wireless product. So they haven't made any news recently, but certainly we would expect that that's an opportunity down the road as they pick their direction.
Yeah, there's certainly the one that comes immediately in mind in terms of controlling enough spectrum to go out there and make a difference, not only with their own business plan, but also to our industry in terms of, additional work to be done. I think it's widely believed that if they do deploy, they will deploy on a network sharing basis. That is something that, while it hasn't been done to any great extent in the U.S., we're all familiar with it because we all got prepared for that with the LightSquare opportunity, which didn't come to pass, but at least the concept was floated and we all kind of came to grips with it. So, if it comes about, I suspect it will come about that way, but he sure seems to be the one that has the right spectrum to be the next, material contributor to the infrastructure industry.
I've got no vision as to where new entrants might come. But certainly I believe that the Dish spectrum will ultimately get deployed by somebody, either by Dish or by some other carrier, and I think that will drive additional demands for infrastructure. The carriers today collectively are spending billions and billions of dollars in refreshing, upgrading, expanding their networks, and they're doing that because they see a fantastic future. And it's not just the existing carriers that see that, of course, new entrants will see that. SoftBank they've come to the US, they've invested in Sprint. They see an enormous opportunity in the US, and we'll see that vision, evolve and unravel over the next few years, and maybe other people, maybe Charlie Ergen will ultimately land on a particular strategy that drives a lot more infrastructure investment for us. Or maybe it'll just exit the business. But one thing's for sure, this is a fantastic industry. It's got fantastic runway, great growth potential, and the carriers will continue to invest in the platforms, and other people will come in to provide that need.
I want to pick up on what Stephen said. Let's not forget the fact that we have 4 very active and viable carriers in the U.S. market today. Each of them, in their own way, being able to distinguish spending that incremental dollar of CapEx and driving an incremental dollar of return, which is not the case necessarily all over the world today. So to have 4 very active carriers in their various stages of rollout, most recently with T-Mobile's very impressive and encouraging financial results last quarter, we've got a horse race, and we've got a lot of capital behind this industry right now. We've got a consumer population, which we're all part of, that apparently has an insatiable desire to have wireless capacity and are willing to pay for it. In many cases, consumer ARPU in the U.S. is something like 4 to 5 times what it is in many other developed countries around the world. So we certainly have this insatiable appetite to stare at multiple screens, maybe even connect all our cars, as we heard this morning, coming down the road, and that's going to drive a lot of network deployment and effective capital deployment on the part of the carriers. And there's no better way to do that than in the shared common elements of the infrastructure that we all own. It's one of the real benefits I think we all bring to this industry, which is not only do we have a very valuable asset in this wireless infrastructure, but it's shareable, and by definition, if done well, can be made available to carriers at a cost that's their most attractive form of occupancy. And you heard that yesterday on the stage, that they're constantly, appropriately so, thinking about how do they manage their cost structure as they go forward with the multi-billion dollars of investment that they're making in these networks. And I think we operate what is basically the most efficient and cost-effective quick way to deploy additional network, and that's a great place to be.
Yeah, it's interesting to see actually in the last 5 years, America's come back from being a laggard in terms of technological sophistication to really being at the forefront of deployment now across such a great expanse. You know, you look at 3G, Europe invested in 3G before America, and now 4G deployment is way ahead of Europe today. So it should be something that we can all be really proud of. You know, what the carriers have actually achieved in a very short period of time, moving from laggard to leader in the world stage.
And all through this period of time, we really haven't had a true new market entry. And we've been pretty busy with the folks that we have.
Well, there's a lot of demand from the data side. We just heard from the connected car panel. You mentioned Ben, and of course railroads are under a statutory deadline by the end of 2015 to have built out positive train control, which could be as many as 20,000 new sites. Some of them very short, but quite an opportunity. Do you think transportation could be a big driver going forward of the industry and driving demand in terms of trains and cars?
We talked about this development a couple years ago, this notion that wireless networks are not only a two-way communication between human beings, but we began to see this notion of machine-to-machine communication. And when you look at what positive control could do, is very similar to what we saw in smart grid 2 years ago. It's a significant initiative where we are using technology to create efficiency and to create faster communications. What's interesting in that is that there'll be some what I would call fringe leasing opportunities for everyone on this stage, just like there was in smart grid, where we didn't do a ton of leasing in smart grid, but there was some anecdotal leasing with some of the major utility companies. We believe that trend will continue in the railroad industry as well. We entered into some partnerships with some railroads with some forethought that there was a double opportunity there. One was to help them enhance their communications needs, which could enhance the cash flow profile of our sites. And then the second thing is having unique locations in places where we can not only have communications equipment for the railroad company, but expand wireless carrier networks along those rights of way, and trying to figure out new and unique ways to provide real estate to our carriers in areas where it's difficult to build, difficult to zone. And when we think about where railroad infrastructure sits today, Jonathan, it's very much where consumers are doing business and consumers are leading their lives at night. So we think it's that from our perspective, that presented a double opportunity for us. And we're seeing that manifest itself in new builds, small cell, and new co-location opportunities now for American Tower.
Yeah, we are partnered with Union Pacific, which is the largest railroad in the country in terms of track miles, and we manage all of their infrastructure. So we've been working with them on what positive train control really will mean. There's going to be a lot of positive train control sites that probably will not be also great sites for mobile wireless, given where a lot of these tracks are. But there will also be a fair number where roads cross, and particularly where you're going through populated areas and cities, where the requirement of the positive train control system may be the tipping scale to actually go forward and build, a larger piece of infrastructure that would have much more multi-tenant use. And the railroads, of course, have certain, zoning exceptions and entitlements that will help speed that process. So I certainly expect to see some incremental positives coming out of all this.
Well, one interesting question I think in a lot of people's minds is how you evaluate international versus domestic opportunities. Of course, you just made a huge investment here in the United States, and yet you're the most international of the companies up here. And all of you have international to some extent and are evaluating. How do you sort of evaluate where you make your incremental investment, whether you go domestic or international, and what do you see as the biggest opportunities coming forward on the M&A front?
Well, obviously we've invested quite considerably internationally, and we've been building on the foundation that we have here in the US, the skills and expertise, our systems, and we've been trying to deploy the US model to more emerging markets that are much further back in the product life cycle of infrastructure development, and bring obviously incremental economic benefit to those countries, drive value for ourselves and our shareholders. So that's been philosophically, a strategic determination to do that, and over the last 6 years that I've been with the company, we've gone into an additional sort of 11 markets, other than sort of Brazil and Mexico. How do you do that? Well, I mean, we just, we will screen out countries that are suitable from a country risk, political risk, financial risk, economic risk perspective, and also they've got the industry makeup with multiple carriers that have infrastructure needs, and once you go through all those filters, you identify countries that might actually hold an economic opportunity. When you identify those, of course, there are no tower companies usually in these emerging markets that you can just go and buy, right? So you're looking to try and convince carriers to sell down assets, or convince carriers to allow you to build assets for them to share. And that has been a very proactive development process for us over those 6 years. And we will continue to do that. We'll continue to deploy capital where we think we can get risk-adjusted rates of returns relevant to that particular country. But this is our home base, and we will always look to enhance our position here in the US, and we're very pleased to secure the GTP assets, which is so complementary to our existing portfolio, adding to our US base, and that makes a lot of sense for us, and we will continue to look for opportunities to further develop here in the US and internationally.
From our perspective, we continue to look at internationally as well, and as we've done that, as the prices of various assets are offered, we've continued to reinforce our view that the North American market is the most attractive wireless market in the world, as measured by lots of different metrics. And while there are certainly attractive growth opportunities in other markets, at the various price points that we've seen, everything has the appropriate price, and it's what makes the world go round, differences of opinion and view. We continue to see the North American market being the most attractive. And we've added over 7,000 sites last year, as well as 10,000 DAS nodes in the small cell business that we operate. We acquired the former NextG, and been very pleased with those acquisitions, and would certainly be open to looking at other things in the U.S. market and in other markets as well. We've continued to look in South America. We've looked in Western Europe a little bit, and again, at the price points today, I don't have any news for you today. I think we're firmly committed to our strategy of being a leader in the North American market.
I would mostly agree with Ben. We do find the North American market very attractive, and it is the market against which we gauge all of our international investments and risk adjust them accordingly. But from our perspective, we think we're in this to do well for our public shareholders, and it's all about growth and increasing value. And we've kind of gone at that equation from the perspective of deciding where we want to capitalize the company. And then once you reach that level of capitalization, which is most commonly defined as your debt to your EBITDA, that's going to create certain amounts of investable capital that you need to deploy every year. And that's probably the most important job that we have, is allocation of capital. So as we were continuing to grow years ago, we saw the need to, if we wanted to stay fully invested in new asset growth, which obviously has to be the right transaction, but we think that is most rewarded for our shareholders. They like to see top line growth, they like to see EBITDA growth. So to make sure we always had the largest or the right size playing field to deploy all the capital that we wanted to deploy, we moved international, and we did that first in Canada, and that's 4 or 5 years ago, and then into Central America, and most currently in Brazil, which is a big market. But every day, there's a new capital allocation decision. U.S., international. If the difference is between the two, what is the appropriate return that you're looking for? Internationally, it's always higher for us than what we would seek in the United States. If things aren't, looking quite right there, we want to stay fully invested. So we have in the past, and I'm sure in the future we'll be a stock repurchaser. Or you always have the ability to pay down your debt, which to us hasn't made much sense recently given the low cost of debt. And it's really all about managing that equation to produce the greatest value for our public shareholders.
What's interesting is the shared infrastructure model is a global business now. And the globalization of sharing infrastructure is prevalent across 4 continents right now. You look at what's happening in Europe with carriers selling assets. You look at the Telefonica disposition, the TDF auction that's going on. You look at what's going on in Africa. You and I talked about this morning. There was a tower conference in Africa last week. 380 people showed up to that conference. There's 4 vibrant tower companies operating, including American Tower in Africa. You look at what's happening in Asia in terms of there's a publicly listed tower company there, Perlinda. There's other smaller tower companies growing every day. There's now tower companies in China. Obviously, the U.S. is active in terms of M&A, new builds. Latin America, there's been significant carrier dispositions. We are now operating in a global theater as an industry. And each and every one of us wakes up every day, and as Jeff said, it's a capital allocation decision, which is, can you achieve your targeted returns for your investors? We all share that same common goal at the end of the day. And I wouldn't put it so much as a, do we invest in North America or international? It's really our decision is a global one these days, which is, can we find good places at the right price to enter into relationships with good customers that can enter into long-term leases, and that we can get the benefit of that business model, which is the reoccurring revenue model that we all like about this business. But if you think about the arc of where this industry has come in 20 years to where we are today, this room isn't just the tower industry. The tower industry is a global industry. And that's really part and parcel of the fact that carriers have accepted the shared infrastructure model across the globe, which makes it exciting for us. We didn't really have these problems 10 years ago. We didn't wake up every day and say, gee, should I invest in Africa, or should I buy a tower business in Spain? These are new problems, not problems, but really new opportunities.
Yeah, it is in our collective best interest on the public side to grow, not only to continue to grow, not only for the top line benefits that investors want to see, but we have really leverageable business models. I mean, for us to continue to add assets and even move into new countries, which require obviously a little bit more work, you see a consistent across the industry decline in your back office or SG&A expenses as a percent of revenue. So we have, by definition, these institutions and frankly machines that we built that do very well with taking on additional assets with very little incremental overhead expense that has to be added. So with that in mind, it's in all of our best interest to continue to grow with assets at obviously at the right price, but to continue to grow our portfolios.
I would add just a little bit different tack. There's a maturation of the industry going on right now, and I think we speculated on this stage for years that perhaps this business model could ultimately attract a cost of capital that was lower than our carrier customers, and we're rapidly approaching that. And I think as we have elected to make the decision to convert to an REIT, as American Tower already is, and Global Tower Partners as a private REIT was, we think that's a model over time that will continue to introduce the tower business, the wireless infrastructure business, to a broader investor base, one that typically brings a lower cost of capital expectation that more appropriately values that long-term recurring contracted revenue stream that we enjoy. And then obviously the ability to redeploy the capital in excess of what we would have in a mandatory distribution as a REIT becomes very important over time. But we're very excited about the opportunity to continue to lower the cost of capital with this new shareholder base as we increase the dividend requirement over time on both companies. Frankly, as the net operating losses that were built up over time are exhausted, I think we provide a pretty clear path to the investment community as to what the business looks like long term. And I think that's very attractive for shareholders. It's also attractive for small tower developers seeking to monetize their investment with one of our companies. And it's also very attractive for our customers, where not only is the shared model economically compelling, I think we all get that, but where we can raise capital, both debt and equity, at an expected return that's actually lower than the carriers themselves, and let them put their resources to work, in a way to best grow their business and let us own and operate the shared infrastructure elements of their business. And this is not unique to wireless. This happens in a lot of different industries, oil and gas industry in a big way as as well, real estate. So I'm very encouraged that we're maturing to the point where I think we're getting to that stage, and I think that's a very nice turn of events for the industry on the whole, which will continue to work globally. I would agree. Nothing about that would be necessarily just focused on the U.S.
Before I open it up to the audience, I think a lot of people are curious and interested in hearing small cells and DAS and your thoughts on trends in that, what you're seeing. Are you seeing that as a very small part of your business but growing? Where are we in the small cell world? Where are we in DAS? And you talked about the shareable model. I mean, is there a time when we'll have small cells can take advantage of that business model, or is it a totally different business model?
Well, I'll jump into that one since I have maybe the biggest one of those investments today. We made a big statement last year with $1 billion investment in small cell business. We had previously been in the business in a smaller way for the past 7 years. We're very encouraged by what we see, and it is very much a shareable model in our view. The fiber and the intellectual property, the permitting, all of that are basically the shareable elements that go into that network. And we're actively building through co-location as well as new systems today. And it's a very big commitment on the part of our company today. We'll probably spend close to $200 million this year on new small cell construction. That's both co-location and new build. It's important to realize that on the small cell architecture, it is necessarily more complicated than the tower. And so when you think about co-location, that can either be on the same pole, in the same shared electronic box, if you will, at the base, or it could be on the next pole over, again, leveraging shared infrastructure just as we do in the tower model. So it's, in our view, very, very complementary. We've heard from the carriers, most recently yesterday, that small cell is definitely going to be a means to add capacity in markets where macro sites are not sufficient. But we share the view that in no means does it take the place of a macro site. And in the macro site case, that's generally always the preferred approach. But the fact is that in a lot of urban environments, you just can't access the capacity in a macro site, and so small cells will certainly be the way to go there. And we see a tremendous take-up and adoption on the part of the carriers in those limited geographies. But by no means do we think it displaces the macro site model.
Very interesting evolution within our industry, and I guess we should all be watching very carefully and testing to see how it will develop. And I don't think it's entirely clear yet. I mean, there's certainly a lot of interest in small cell, but actually defining what a small cell is actually is not clear. And a small cell might not really be a small cell in reality. We're seeing people think about putting small cells supposedly on our towers as an underlay network. We're seeing people talk about small cells, just throwing them out to enterprise customers and saying, plug this in and you'll improve your wireless capacity and capability. So what does it actually mean for us? So we will continue to evaluate that and see whether there's just the degree of opportunity there is for us and our shareholders. But we've been in the business for a long time, particularly on the in-building side, on the DAS side. We've got over 260 in-building systems across some of the biggest venues across the US, and we have more systems than anybody else in building systems, third-party systems than anybody else in the US. So we're heavily invested in it in terms of the niche that we're talking about. And we continue to invest in that, and the reality is I'm spending more last year, this year, probably next year on in-building DAS systems than I've ever spent in the 6 years that I've been involved with American Tower. So we're spending more than we've done historically. But having said that, it is still a very, very small part of the revenues and the EBITDA of American Tower. Macro towers are by far the biggest driver of revenues and EBITDA for us in the US, and I think to be so, despite the fact we built one of the biggest networks at Daytona in a record time earlier in the year, and we're now building out this the fourth NASCAR network. So we're investing more than we've ever done, but it's still a very, very small part of our business.
We have our view and our participation in DAS and small cells through our investment in Extenet, which many of you know is a specialty company that focuses on DAS and small cells in building. I would agree with Steve. The in-building wireless is very hot and has been for some time. That's a very active area that should stay busy. DAS seems to be gaining more traction. I think DAS in general, when just for some structural reasons as to which players were really using DAS and which weren't, took a bit of a step backwards when AT&T announced the T-Mobile acquisition, and they had a period of time there where certain projects that were moving forward were not. But for the first time, I'm very pleased and excited to say I think we are now finally seeing some true small cell deployments. I think that that there was a huge gap a year ago between the buzz about small cells and what was really getting done. But I think that's starting to narrow, and I do think we'll be able to talk increasingly as years go by about actual, true small cell deployments that I think probably are going to be yours.
We always took the approach that we're really in the site solutions business. So at the end of the day, we try to listen to what our customers are telling us, where they need to be. And what's become increasingly more apparent to us is that carriers really view small cell as a tool to extend the network closer to the subscriber. And this is no more prevalent than really in the urban core. And so when we think about where we go to work every day, or where we meet, where we communicate, carriers want to extend that signal closer and closer to the device as possible, because obviously the performance of the device is enhanced if you can shorten the distance or the propagation of the spectrum from the antenna to the device. So when we thought about that, we said, okay, well, how do we provide solutions to our carrier partners? And what we came up with was you got to have all of the tools. You got to have DAS. You have to have in-building systems. You have to have towers. And you really have to have a significant commercial real estate portfolio. Because at the end of the day, during the middle of the work week, that's where we go. We hang out in office buildings, hotels, malls, restaurants, and this is where we're using our communications devices. This is where we're downloading documents, downloading music, downloading video. And to do that, we believe that carriers will deploy technology that's, one, cost-effective, that's inexpensive for them, and can be deployed quickly. And to do that effectively, what we have found is that having commercial real estate in the urban core, we're not just leasing the rooftop, but we're leasing the sides of buildings, we're leasing inside of buildings. There's this, the investor community, the analyst community wants this magic bullet to explain small cell. Well, the reality is there is no magic bullet. There's a variety of solutions that accomplish the carrier's objectives. There are microcells, there's DAS, there's femtocells, there's Wi-Fi offload, there's macro cells. There's a variety of solutions that they have in their arsenal to achieve their coverage objectives. We as an infrastructure provider need to predict that and have infrastructure that meets those needs. And so when we think about small cell, we always chuckle a bit because small cell's been around for years, John. You go back to the early 90s when Cellular One did their first 1,000 microcells in New York City. And these were the chiclet antennas that sat on the second story of buildings throughout New York. And now today AT&T has those sites, and they have about 4,000 of those sites throughout New York City. So small cell's not new. It's been here for a long time. But we adapt, we change, we try to predict where our carrier partners need to go. And I think that's the business that we saw ourselves in. I think that's the business American Tower sees themselves in, is being in offering a variety of site solutions. And I think that's critical success path for everyone on this stage.
Thanks. Let's open up the audience to see. We have a few minutes left to entertain any questions you might have out there.
Got one here.
Good.
Gracious government.
One second. We're going to get a microphone to Tom, you have a question for us?
Hey, Jonathan, thank you. Congratulations on another great show. Panelists, we talked a little bit earlier about 4G. And Jeffrey talked about considerable volume of upgrades and amendments. So now we're seeing in the marketplace for the first time in several years, really volume search rings for info. So it's been a nice pivot that the carriers are making to accomplish that for their networks. Can you tell the audience a little bit about any things your business is doing to meet that need, to put up the new steel, and how you see it as being different in 2013, 2014 than some of the previous generations of search ring work we experienced in the industry?
Yeah, we go back all the way to the days of the PCS build out. So we've seen some huge waves of new tower builds. I don't know that anything will be different. I do think you'll see more volume. I'm not sure we will, staff it or change the way we go about the business. But I think where we're coming off of, and again, it's a very natural kind of progression. The carriers stayed away more so from new builds while they were doing their 4G. They had to basically get the 4G coverage out there. That was an amendment process. That was speed to market. That was most economical for them. So now you will see, and again, it's a very natural progression based on what we've seen in 2G and 3G. There's going to be holes, which a lot of those holes will be satisfied by existing infrastructure, but a lot of them won't. And that's where the new builds are going to be coming from. So as you look to the various phases of the LTE build out, for the folks who concentrate on new builds, first phase wasn't all that active. You're going to see a lot more activity in second and third cycles.
I think it's really exciting, Tom. I mean, if you go back to Jeff, like the late '90s when we were building for some of the affiliates, what we saw was wholesale BTS agreements where Jeff would get 500 rings and he'd have to go build all 500 sites. I think those days are sort of behind us. I think what we see today is a bit more of a dynamic build plan, and really that's very encouraging news for everyone in this room, because what we see is that there will be a series of new builds. It's not going to be one vendor satisfies the entire solution for the carrier in that market or all those markets. And actually what I heard this week was a lot of optimism, particularly in smaller developers and middle market tower companies, that they're seeing these search rings. One of the common themes we heard on Monday was that people's backlogs are up 2-3x on new builds. That's probably the most healthy trend I've seen come out of this conference than anything we've talked about. Because the lifeblood of this industry, while it's important what we do up here, it's really out there. And it's everyone in this room that's out building sites and taking risk and going and leasing land and getting permits. That's encouraging news. The fact that we see the private community, their backlogs up 2-3x is an extremely healthy sign for this industry and for this trade association.
Well, one of the most encouraging things we heard at the conference, at least for me, was the statements twice yesterday that the networks are supply constrained. So as soon as an LTE site gets turned up, the capacity basically gets consumed, and as the carrier continues their deployment and completes it in the market, right back looking at search rings and where can they add capacity and add network density. And that's great for all of us. It was anticipated, I'd like to say. It's sort of the natural cycle that we've seen in the industry. But with every next cycle, it's nice to see that we all can sort of see out another 3 years of runway of continued growth through co-locations, new builds, amendments. And for the investment community, they're constantly looking for what's that next inflection point. And I keep telling them, there's not necessarily an inflection point, but there's an extension of the runway here, which we couldn't have seen maybe 2 years ago. We anticipated it, but today you can actually see it, and that's very encouraging.
Paul Kirby with TR Daily. You all mentioned small cells yesterday here. Jonathan mentioned the FCC is looking to try to ease the deployment of small cells. And I wondered if any of you would like to comment on their proposals.
I think the work that PCIA has done with the proposed notice of rulemaking that the FCC has put out is very encouraging to basically have a small data node like this not necessarily treated like a tower, and ultimately facilitate capacity infill in these urban geographies that need it. And so anything that ultimately speeds up the deployment and reduces cost is a welcome enhancement. And PCIA we can thank PCIA for really driving that, along with the tower work.
That's going to help FirstNet too. I might add, since building casinos here, is that when FirstNet comes to deploy, they have to have every little DAS node, every small cell go through Section 106 review and NEPA. They're not going to be able to build out their network to provide public safety to our first responders. So thank the FCC for doing that.
Over there.
There's a question.
Thank you, Jonathan Showcraft from Evercore. It's a good opportunity with all four of you on stage to ask this question in terms of approach to M&A. There seems to be two schools of thought. One school of thought prefers towers built with multi-tenancy in mind, readily available capacity, ready to go operating leverage, versus another school of thought which says, hey, location's more important even if it requires significant incremental capital investment. And I'd like to hear the different perspectives of the panel members as to which view they employ and why. Thanks.
I'll take a crack at that. Please jump in. We've been very successful with carrier towers. We've, out of the 30,000 sites we own, Jonathan, I would venture to say probably 25,000 of them were built by carriers. Typically, we acquired those towers with something on the average of $25,000 of revenue per tower on average, maybe a little higher. And today, across the company, the average is about $75,000. So we've had a pretty good track record over time of adding revenue to those sites. As you rightly point out, our view is location and the existence of the site is probably the most important element. And as we've all gotten pretty good at this in engineering and structurally enhanced reinforcements, it's the highest and best use of allocation of capital to improve an existing site when you've got additional revenue coming on it. And it's something that we focus on. We've gotten pretty good at it, and we're continuing to be committed to that. Not to say we've done other transactions, certainly, but we've been pretty partial to the success we've had with carrier towers.
Yeah, we are on the opposite end of the spectrum, and I would first of all say every tower has a value. But we have historically preferred building towers and buying towers from other folks like us who are in the independent tower ownership business. From our perspective, the quality is very good, the capacity is very good, and the contractual freedoms are particularly, we like that. But at the end of the day, these are assets, all of which have a value, and you need to find the right value. We do prefer, whether it be a carrier tower or a developed tower by somebody in the audience. We like growth. We want to see additional growth. We think traditional TCF and EBITDA valuations matter, although today increasingly folks are talking about AFFO per share accretion, which of course is heavily dependent on the current cost of interest rates. So we kind of triangulate all that, Jonathan, by looking for continued growth estimates.
Key word for me is, our philosophy absolutely is every town has a value. And I don't place the value on it, whether it's an established tower with multi-tenants and spare capacity or no capacity, or whether it's one with a single anchor tenant and once we take it forward from there, which has capacity and has opportunity. So every town has a value. We're in the tower business. We're in the business of growing that business. We're in the business of offering wider scope and capability to the carriers, and we'll continue to do that. So whether that's through acquisition, whether it's through new build, we will continue on all of those fronts. We're sort of getting close to the end of the session. I've got a question for the audience, actually. Before I ask that, I am the treasurer of PCIA. That's the best position you can have because I get access to the money. And the money's in good shape because of your attendance here and all of the developments that PCIA have done. But this is your conference. This is your convention. So please give feedback to us because we can utilize that. We can utilize that here maybe in the latter stages of this, or maybe more so as we try to provide future venues, future conventions. So please give us your feedback so that we can try and make this even more pertinent to your specific requirements.
And I would just say one last thing, Jonathan, for you, just to give you potentially a different perspective on your question, which was very thoughtful. We're at the end of the day, we're in the real estate business. So having the ability to have open space to lease to future customers is a critical success factor in any real estate business. And when given the choice to have a multi-tenant property where I can lease cleanly and without a lot of tenant improvement dollars, so to speak, to use a real estate term, we've always made that decision, similar to Jeff, to invest in those types of assets. But what's interesting in the market today with carrier acquisitions, Jonathan, it's not so much that the physical attributes are inferior to a developer portfolio, which in most cases they are. The real issue is the contracts. And what we mean by that is the MLA that's being offered in exchange for those carrier towers. That's the real critical path item. What are you giving up? What is the reserve capacity? And to what ends are you sacrificing future growth by acquiescing to a carrier's needs on reserve capacity, future loading, future spectrum? All of these components speak to value. At the end of the day, the value of a tower, yes, is the location. Yes, it's the physical steel, the collateral, but more importantly, and how the rating agencies think about it, it's the quality of the cash flows and the ability of that asset to continue to grow and not be constrained by limited master lease agreement. That to me is the conundrum of the investment thesis today, is whether or not you can achieve growth on an asset and have the ability to continue to achieve growth from that existing customer that you just bought the asset from. We think about that a lot, and that's where we've struggled with some of the larger carrier acquisitions. I'll leave you with that thought.
Building on what Steve said, I want to make sure everybody knew that we are moving our show next year to May. So in 2014, from May 19th to May 22nd, we'll be in Orlando at the Rosen Shingle Creek Hotel. It's May 19th, May 22nd. It's going to be a great show again. A little bit shorter because since we're moving to the spring this year, we have a little bit less turnaround between them, so a little less than a year. I'm up on like 8 months. But with all the momentum we have coming out of this show, I think it's going to be another fantastic one. I want to let you know the exhibit hall is now open. And this afternoon, of course, we have a number of great panels coming up. So let's give thanks to NBC and Tom King for sponsoring.